Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis,
And I'm Michael.
and we are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. The topics on this show range from theology, masculinity, movies, philosophy, books, pop culture, and many other subjects. We often talk about the people we admire and the wisdom that they share. People such as Jordan B. Peterson, who we believe is the sage of our time. And we are back with our Exodus series, and it's Exodus 5.
Yeah.
So what do you so for anybody who doesn't know, I guess we should say that Jordan Peterson has on the Daily Wire paywall. He has a series of Exodus seminars where he brings dignitaries, Bible dignitaries, and they discuss the book of Exodus in the Bible. And Michael and I have been kind of slowly going through them because we find it highly interesting, and it's just a lot of fun to do. So we would suggest that anybody watching or listening go check out those episodes and then come back and listen to this. But it's really kind of just a jumping off point for a in-depth conversation about the Bible. They start out at the very beginning of this episode kind of discussing free will. I think they've covered this topic before, where the Pharaoh, they talk about hardening of the Pharaoh's heart. God hardens his heart. Excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, and growing up, it never made sense to me that, in fact, growing up Mormonism, as growing up on a polygamous compound, we believed that Joseph Smith had a translation of the Bible where he corrected things, and that was something that the Pharaoh's hardening. So it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he changed that. He corrected it to say something else. It was something like, and God saw that Pharaoh hardened his heart, or something like that. So he kind of changed it. But
what do you think?
It makes
what do you
sense.
think Joseph Smith's motivation for doing that was?
I think Joseph wanted to go through the Bible, and because he was a prophet, and because they claimed that the Bible was had been translated over and over again so many times that it was kind of there was a lot of things lost in translation, which is true. But I mean, we can still go back to like the Hebrew. Dennis Prager points out things that are in the Hebrew that kind of fix some of these problems that we see in because, like, I mean, there were little things that he changed. Like, there's a story of Lot where Lot is like, hey guys, don't rape these angels that are in my house, have my daughters, right? There's little things where you're just like, what? Like, God, what the hell? Like, what? And so Joseph went in and tried to fix some of those things because he was a prophet and he had the authority or whatever.
There's a lot of hubris in that.
There's a lot of hubris in that, but I don't know. I don't sit on a pedestal to want to point fingers and judge some aspects of Joseph or Mormonism in general. I still am just like right there. I mean, so we had a little while back, we had our nephew on, and the Fresh King Benjamin, and Ben feels like there's no quarter. There's no there's really no basically like no saving grace to Mormonism at all. And I guess I'm still in the wrestle with God on that.
Yeah, on that. Yeah.
On that front. So
Well, and it
take that for what it is.
have you read the translation, the Joseph Smith translation?
In the Mormon, so King James version. So the Mormons use the King James version. They have footnotes of Joseph's translations. So and I can't remember exactly. I think what I did is before I read the Bible, I went and marked all of the footnotes where Joseph had a change. Because I was a true blue believer, right?
Yeah.
So I went through and marked all that so that I could follow it while I read it all the way through. I think I marked the Hebrew too, because they would do footnotes of the Hebrew as well.
Well, I remember,
so it was kind of neat.
A few times in meetings, people going, "Oh, well, it says in the Joseph Smith translation," and I always thought that was, I don't know really how I felt about it at the time.
Yeah.
Because it was just it's kind of a bizarre thing for somebody to try to do. I mean, even Dennis Prager says that he has he calls them commentaries, like he goes through the books of the first 5 books of the Bible, and he just writes these long basically dissertations of those books, which I don't think is
and there were some places where Dennis Prager or even others basically were like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm not sure.
And even these guys who have dedicated their entire lives to this, they don't even always know. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So, I mean, anyway.
What do you think about the discussion of free will at the beginning? Like basically saying that God could have made Pharaoh do this, but he wanted him to choose to do it.
So I think the point of where it says that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, and they talk about this, but it's basically that they want it to be clear to the reader, to the world, that God, yes, God has power, and God could have come in and forced whatever he wanted Pharaoh to do, right?
Yeah.
Like there is, and that's kind of the point, is that God is going to allow people to do what's really the desire of their heart, even if it's to have a genocide, right?
Yeah,
even if
like
there's
the Nazis, so
bad things that happen, that it's not just that that God's just going to waltz in and kind of save the day. God works through the people, which is kind of the whole thing. They started out this story with God needed somebody to work with, and Moses is the guy that God is going to work with to do this thing, right? And I think it goes to the question in all of us, right, to ask ourselves in our heart of hearts, to say, what do I need to do? Where's my place in the cosmos, in the universe, to do the thing that that may correct the things in the world that aren't right, to fix the world, right?
To fix the world. Yeah.
And where do we need to put in our hat into the ring?
Well, and it goes, I like the idea of choice. I think so Ben Shapiro, there's a video out there with, I think I've mentioned this before, with Lex Friedman, where he basically says God wants you to make free choice. So Nazi Germany, they all made the choice to eradicate an entire civilization, or try to eradicate it. And the same thing, God wants us to make free choice, and if we're not making free choice, then it's just forcing us. So I think the bad of the world, God doesn't do. Men do that because of their choices, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting concept, because everybody always uses the excuse, well, why would God allow this
Why would a loving God
allow
allow
this
this to
evil thing to
happen?
happen? The point is that God doesn't allow it to happen. He allows people to have free choice, and they
Yeah.
choose bad things, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we've talked
I
about this before.
I'm kind of moving on. Jonathan
Okay.
Pageau talks a little bit about the judgment, that maybe judgment are natural consequences of our actions,
Oh yeah.
and
There you
that
go.
the fruits of your actions are almost the judgments that's brought back upon you, right?
So
And
in other words, like if you're shooting up heroin,
he uses that as an example. Yeah.
yeah, you're going to wreck your life. It'll be the only thing you think about. It'll be the only thing you're trying to get. And that in itself is the hell that you create. So that's the judgment. It's a very interesting idea, because it's also like, if you make a you know, a wrong choice in high school, and you go drinking with your friends, and you get in a car and you kill somebody, the consequences of that
Yeah.
are you are an 18-year-old kid who's going to prison for the rest of his life for manslaughter, or 25 years,
Right.
and so that is like the consequence of the bad action, the stupidity, or the
Yeah.
and it's weird, because we've become a world of that doesn't like consequences, that's always trying to weasel out of consequences.
A world that wants to have all consequences be bailed out of. So all consequences should be bailed out of, which,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just goes in case in point of like bailing out big businesses,
Yeah.
right? So it's just woven into our culture now to bail people out.
Instead of let it burn down, kind of thing.
And we've kind of talked about this, is like sometimes I feel like the scriptures may kind of point this out, is that it might not be so much of just a bearded guy in the sky wanting to rain down judgment upon you.
Mhm.
It's more of that we live in a world where there are consequences to actions, and if you have these actions, you're going to reap the consequences.
Well, it goes back to the unintrusive God idea that I kind of been toying with myself, because it goes back to this God that doesn't actually intervene in your life. You are just you are just the
recipient.
you're recipient of your own actions.
Yeah.
Right. So the
One thing
the reason I'm broke all the time is because I don't have a good job, that kind of thing.
Right. Right. One thing I wanted to point out here, and they never really touch on this. They talk about, because in this they wrap up the plagues.
Oh
right?
yeah, in this episode. Yeah, episode
they
5.
wrap up the plagues, and if you're not familiar, the last plague is the plague that where God himself comes and kills the firstborn in Egypt.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if you think about what they started off talking about, how the fruits of your actions are almost the judgment that's brought back upon you. Well, let's think about what happened back when Moses was a baby.
Yes.
The Egyptians went and killed all the male babies.
Yeah, of the Israelites, and
right,
eradicating a generation, and so God brings about the same thing to the Egyptians
right back upon them.
Yeah, 80 years later, or whenever it is.
Yeah, however long this is, it probably was about 80, 90 years later.
Yeah,
that they brought that this is. So I feel like this is a cosmic judgment that's come down upon the the
Well,
Egyptians.
and
Like,
think of Germany right after the end of World War II.
oh, people that were there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a really good show on Netflix that I enjoyed, and I can't remember for the life of me. I can't remember what it's called, but it was about a cop, a New York cop that goes to Germany to help restructure or to help with a murder. And this is right after World War II, and they show like bombings, like bombed buildings and all kinds of stuff. Very interesting
Oh.
show. But anyway, the cost, Germany was in kind of a depression for I don't know, several years after World War II. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that it was the retribution. Now, it probably didn't equal. It's not like Germans were being
Well,
slaughtered or
and a lot of
tortured.
Nazis got away to South America and
Yeah,
lived out their lives,
lived out their lives. So
peaceful and fine.
you like to think that the cosmic justice is a thing, but it you can't. There's a lot of things that you cannot think of that happen nowadays that it that has actually happened to. Like, I guess the communist Russia. I don't even think they faced cosmic justice, right? For their atrocities that happened with the gulags and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of,
Just economic downturn,
yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough Dennis Prager talks about the justice that he wants served upon Pharaoh. He wants bad guys to get what they deserve. And I want that as well. But I don't know if it happens.
That's one you see on, that's the clip you see on the YouTube a lot, is like, it's like Jordan Peterson, don't you want them to learn learn their lesson before the ultimate price? And he's like, that's such a Des
Christian
Prager,
way.
that's such a
Yeah.
Christian thing to say.
Yeah.
No, I want them to be punished. I want the pharaohs of the world, the atrocity, the people who are in charge of the atrocities,
Yeah.
to be punished.
To be punished.
That's what I want.
Yeah. That's yeah.
So I made a note here on the Prager talking about honor being, so like the word, the commandment, honor thy father and thy mother, the Hebrew is heavy. And I thought that was interesting. Like,
well, it's like hold them heavy in your heart.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's like weighty. It's like,
yeah,
it's like taking their teachings, like them as individuals, and holding them in a heavy esteem, which is hard to kind of explain, but like,
well, everybody gets it, because when you become a teenager, you become heavily rebellious, right? You're like, oh, screw you, dad. I don't want to do, what you tell me. And I did it, and I'm dealing with it with my own children. But I think that's why this is a commandment, is because the wisdom of years, you as a teenager need to get away from your family, but the wisdom of years on this earth gives your parents a little bit of, more to offer you if you're willing to receive it. And I don't know about you, but I wasn't willing to receive much from dad, mainly because of our relationship. But see, I think that's why being a good parent is important, because then you're keeping that door open, even if the kid doesn't want to take advantage of it, right? So your children.
well, and it's also, I don't feel like it ever really says do what your parents say. Like, I don't know that that's really what it's kind of saying, but it's more of kind of
like loving them.
respect,
Yeah. Just
like
loving them, probably.
like respecting their opinion and like giving their like where they're coming from some gravitas and like some serious consideration, right? So like if I, you know, our parents wanted us to live uh in the faith, the polygamous faith,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And you know that wasn't going to happen, but maybe there was something to be gleaned from their view that would give us something to take with us in life, right? Like it doesn't just mean that we need to just poo poo everything. And this is, I mean, we're
We're
looking at this in our
in
society, just
society
in general.
society, excuse me. Society has decided that the children know better. This
Yeah.
is where like Greta Thunberg comes in, and
Yeah.
she's a 16-year-old girl who's telling everybody how to
Run
keep
countries.
run countries and keep the planet from burning up or whatever her theories are.
And I had in college, I was in a class and we were talking about tech or something like that. And someone in the class was just like, how is it that we have a bunch of people in Congress that are old and don't know anything about the internet?
Yeah.
And I pushed back a little bit on that. I was just like, just because you don't know what a server is doesn't mean that you don't have some wisdom to bring about human nature and running nations.
Well,
Like,
and this is the problem with old folks home. This is what we do as a country. We go, okay, you're old. We're
put
gonna
them in a
put you in
can.
put
Just,
you in a
yep.
home. You don't have anything to offer. No, you have wisdom to offer. And this used to be so in other countries, Southeast Asian countries, the elderly live with the family until they pass on, and the children are pretty much kind of helped because the able-bodied adults go off to work, right? And the children are kind of raised by the elderly.
Yes.
And it's
And they found that people will live longer.
mm-hmm.
This is from a TED Talk, Blue Zones. People tend to live longer if they're in a multi-generational home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's something about granny hanging out with the little kids
That
that keeps
helps.
them
Yeah.
young
That keeps them
and
young.
and brings some wisdom to the young. Right.
Yeah.
So and they talk about this, about the importance of the family's dinner table.
Oh yeah. In
In
this
this
episode, yeah.
Exodus episode, right? They
And
all
that's
talk
another
about
thing. Yeah, that's another
that
thing
it.
that society isn't doing anymore is
In
sitting
fact,
at the dinner table.
Dennis Prager says that the table at home is more important than the synagogue
To the Jewish people.
to the Jewish community. He
Yeah,
says that the table at home is more important than the synagogue.
yeah.
Right. So it is kind of the most important thing. And I not that they were trying to go for this or anything like that, but I loved it. And you know, I'm not giving any spoilers on the Super Mario Brothers movie that just came out, but they show the two brothers, Mario and Luigi. Um, they go home to their home, and literally there's like little kids and there's like granny at the dinner table.
Yeah.
They have all their whole family is all at the dinner table,
Because
and they're all talking, and they're all like kind of bantering a little bit and giving Mario a hard time. Like this is, and it's just it's a small scene. It's not like huge, but and it shows them a couple times later, but I loved that. I thought it was great. I was just like, that is so
Well,
missing in
it's
our
missing in our
society right now.
society. Yeah.
Yeah, that needs to be portrayed in our
Well,
in our media.
the importance of family is eroding. The importance of families eating together is eroding. The importance of us honoring our father and our mother, not just honoring, because honoring, everybody thinks obeying, but
Mhm.
it's more along, like you said, it's more along the lines of, it's just honoring what has come before, and maybe there's wisdom to pull, extract from that, you know,
Yeah,
because everything's about young nowadays. You know, they want you to be young, they want you to look young, and you know, this could be just the rantings of two older guys, right?
yeah.
So, but
Well, I mean, think about like how I mean, we'll probably get into this, or we've probably talked about it a lot before, but basically the new Star Wars, right? It's the young comes and and like Ray comes and she beats the crap out of Luke, and Luke is this loser that's an old guy it's just it's portrayed so much in our society that the young just are so much better and know so much better than the old.
then
and
yeah,
and
and
I
it's
think
just
we are doing ourselves a disservice
huge
with this.
disservice with
you
that.
know Gary Vaynerchuk mentions how he's just like, seriously, people, like, go talk to an old person, ask them
Yeah,
about like the life that they've lived, the things that they've seen, the
yeah,
presidents who have come and gone, the scandals that have come and gone, the economic downturns and upturns, and like, I mean, it gives you some perspective,
yeah,
to talk with somebody who's
yeah,
been alive for 70 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
because they've lived a whole life. I mean, you know, and they may have even been involved in a war. They may have
Mm.
like lived an extraordinary life, because that is, you know, and nobody wants to, it's very superficial, and it's very depressing, really, because when you when you talk to young people, I've gotten to the age now that I'm like, I have nothing to talk to you about.
Yeah. Well, have you seen that little clip of a World War II veteran walking, and they all these kids are like flipping off, and they're just like, and like
Just being
just
assholes.
being assholes. Yeah, just straight up assholes. And he's really old. You can tell
Yeah,
he's like walking, and it's just like he's old.
yeah,
And all these, and he kind of like, he's like, he looks back and he's just like, what? Like, he's not really probably quite there. But
hmm,
the point of the video is just like, oh, like the loss of respect
yeah,
in our society. And I mean, it's really shown with everything, right? It
yeah.
really is like
Pop culture,
pop
movies,
culture,
books,
movies.
music.
It's all about bringing down what was held up as wisdom before, right? Bringing down the patriarchy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm not saying that there aren't institutional things that
Need
can't
changing.
be changed, that can't be
Yeah.
made better, right? Like, there's a lot of work to be done, but seriously, it's
Well, it's not.
we
I always say, at the expense of what?
yeah.
So are we are we going in the right direction? Are we, there's institute, like you said, institutional things that maybe need to be changed, but at the expense of the legacy?
Yeah.
At the expense of what?
Mhm.
Like transgender men in female sports? Maybe transgenders need to have their own sports, because transgenders going into female sports is at the expense of females.
Yeah.
And if you audience, if you have an issue with that, you go check out, just Google search Riley Gaines. Well, okay, let's
That's
move
got.
on.
I thought
There,
this was interesting. They talked about tyrants and Moses being the first servant leader. And I tried to go back because I thought that there were other in Genesis. I thought there were other leaders that were considered quote unquote servant leaders. And I guess maybe you could see, I mean, maybe Joseph in Egypt might have been something along that
what's
line,
the
along
idea
those lines.
about? I'm blanking on this. What's the idea?
The idea of a servant leader, um, best the best way to, I guess, portray that in that we know of would be when Christ says, "The greatest among you will be servant of all," and he washes the disciples' feet.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
and he's doing it as an example of, like, listen, I'm the son of God, but I'm here to serve others.
My people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and really, if you think about it, the greatest leaders, um, in a sense, and John C. Maxwell is a author on leadership. He does a lot of books on leadership, and he talks about servant leadership all the time. Right? He's very Christian in his
Well, because
in
then
his writing.
it's getting rid of the tyrant. If you can humble yourself among your people, then you're not going to be tyrannical, right?
Right. And this goes back to, like, Jordan Peterson talks about the apes that are reciprocal, that,
Oh yeah.
like, go and they'll, you know,
Groom.
they'll mingle with the other
Yeah.
females, and they'll,
Grooming
you
is
know,
kind of considered the
grooming.
reciprocal thing. Yeah, that they
Yeah,
do.
they'll do grooming with all of them and stuff like that. Those are the ones that stay in power. I mean, in power, I guess, would is kind of a strong term, but they're the ones that will stay kind of the
The leader of the group. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
longest, whereas these big mighty alpha males that come in and just kind of brute force everything, they don't last. Eventually they'll have a bad day, and two subordinates that are 3/4 his size will tear him apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'll have a bad day, and eventually those two will just take him out.
Well, and that
Which
happened.
is the same. And they talk about tyrants with Stalin, with all these guys that just basically, they were
Hitler.
tyrants, but they were all hyper what is it, conspiratorial. They seriously thought there was always a conspiracy against them, and they were probably right.
They're
because
probably right. Yeah,
everyone hated them.
Everybody wanted to get rid of them. Yeah,
and people wanted to get rid of them. Exactly.
So the servant leader is a very interesting concept, because you would, so I kind of, if you want like leadership, like you would go back to like some of our founding fathers, right?
Mm-hmm.
These men who maybe their motivations weren't completely altruistic, but they're you know them by their fruits, right? So George Washington, John Adams, these guys who started our country, Jefferson, they would have been those type of men who I think they were wealthy. John Adams probably less wealthy than the other two, but if you go into any of their backgrounds, you know that they were also servants of the people. Sure.
Yeah, and like you said, some of them might have started out. It might have started out with, like, "Hey, listen, I don't want to pay taxes anymore." Right? It may have started out that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, eventually, if you think about it, if they had lost the war, all of them would have been hanging from trees.
Yeah.
All of them. Right.
So they had
so
a
this
lot
was
of
not
risk. This was a huge risk.
yeah, this was not at any kind of this was at some major risk to themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
That and their life. And like if you think about it, it probably wouldn't have just been them. It probably would have been their children and their children's children. Like it would
Yeah.
have been
Bad.
everyone that had
Well,
any kind of association with them.
well, and it wasn't like they weren't well known. Like Jefferson, Franklin, Benjamin Franklin was actually known in Europe very
Yeah.
well. Like he
Yeah.
was famous. He was a
Mhm.
famous writer. He was just really famous.
Yeah.
So it's not like he wasn't going to lose out if things went south.
Lose everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to that phrase. God, who said it? I want to say it was John Hancock. That was like burn Boston, burn, though it make me a pauper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they and we've talked about in the past episodes some of the sacrifices that the founding fathers went through to see to the birth of a new nation. Right.
Yeah.
Like and that, I mean, and back to like what I just said, if we had lost, all of them would have swung from trees.
Yeah, they all would have been
all of them
executed.
I mean,
yeah.
they would have been what do they call it when you they would have been
treason. They would have
treason. Yeah. They would have been treasonous, and they all would have swung from trees.
Yep.
So I mean, for anybody that's like, oh well, they all got rich off of it, blah blah blah. I mean, I'm sure that there was probably some people that, you know, made money or made it better off, being that they were able to throw off a tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if you go back to the Exodus story, like it does talk about how some of the Egyptians began giving them their riches when because the children of Israel were leaving.
Yeah,
they were giving them their riches. So there is a type of enrichment that can come. Now, I mean, eventually they're out in the desert, and things take a turn for the worse. And at some point, they're actually begging to go back to the tyranny, because at least a tyranny where they had a full belly was better than being out in the desert. Right?
Well, and that's like when prisoners are released, they, after a long period of time of being in prison, they can't handle society, and so they trying to get back to get into prison, right?
I mean, I'm sure that there's exceptions to that, but that is pointed out in the movie Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah,
pointed out so well.
Yeah,
so
because
well.
he can't function in regular society.
What a great movie.
Yeah.
What a great, my wife and I just watched that. I mean, it was a little while ago, but we rewatched that, and being the more mature and the older I get, the more I appreciate that movie. Like, it just like, dude,
that's
man,
a good one.
Like the wording and everything that they did. I mean, talk about, you know, how they can flub up so much on newer movies, and their commentary or their words in the script, and it's all just complete garbage. And then you go back to some of these older things, and you're just like, how in the world did they like write somebody knew what they were doing. Like somebody wrote a script, and it was so well put together for movies like The Shawshank Redemption. You're just like,
it's a Stephen King short story, right?
Was it a short story? I thought it was a real book. I think it was a book.
It's a short story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. And Stephen I think he might have had something to do with the making of that.
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
All
he sells the rights to his short fiction with $1. He famously.
No, really.
Yeah. He's like, anybody who wants to make anything out of this, I'll give him I'll give it to him for $1.
I would hope that he would try to at least in some way have a write-off. I mean, at least most of them have been good. Cause like nowadays I'd be scared crapless that somebody would take my book, my short story or something like that and just
Yeah.
totally ruin it.
Yeah.
I would be scared crapless of that. I
Yeah.
mean,
So let's move into this. So that there's another thing that I want to discuss about the thou shalt not kill. They discuss this, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's not, the translation is actually thou shalt not murder.
yeah,
So it's like, it's in, if you kill somebody in defense, then you will not be judged as harshly. I think
yeah,
that's a better translation of the Ten Commandments than
yeah. And I think it would also kind of fall into if you're at war, if
yeah.
you kill somebody at war, that would not count as murder,
Yeah.
so to speak. um I think murder kind of falls into a different category.
It is
um
it is a very interesting concept, because we all hear the Ten Commandments as thou shalt not kill, but it's more along the lines of thou shalt not murder. And murder is basically, I guess I would put it, define it as a inherently selfish act, because you're causing harm that doesn't need to be caused. But if you kill somebody in defense of, because there are bad people out there, anybody who thinks that there aren't bad people out there is a fool. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting concept. I think we've talked about it before, but I
yeah.
just wanted to point that out, that I found that very,
One thing I really found interesting, and can we talk about this for a minute,
uh-huh.
is that Pharaoh said that they could leave. Pharaoh said that they could leave, but they could only take the men.
Well, he kept doing that.
He
And
kept
then it
doing
was
it.
then it was like, you
They
can take everybody, but you can't take your flocks. And then
I
um
had to I had to stop it, and I had to think about this for a little bit. I had to think about it, and I stopped it, and I thought about this, and I wrote down, um the promised land is nothing without our families.
yeah,
If you think about it, that they're just like, nope, we're not going to leave and take all of our men, because what is the freedom if we can't have
have
our
your
families
families.
with us?
Yeah.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I think
What is
it
life when you don't have a family, right?
this made me think of MGTOW. I don't know, no, not that any of our listeners would know, but MGTOW is an acronym for men going their own way. And there's a little bit of a movement. I guess you could call them incels, involuntary celibates. But there's
And
been a movement
this is
with the
online.
rise of feminism,
Yeah.
uh, for men to want to check out of everything, to just check out of the dating
Society.
market, the check out of uh, the capitalism, like the job market, to just check out.
Well,
And
at latest reporting, 7 million able-bodied men in this country that currently do not are not looking for work.
I loved this. Chris Williamson had a guy on that was talking about the 7 million
Okay.
men that are in all data, they suspect are able to work and just do not.
Well, and who's the demographic that has the highest suicide rate?
Men, yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
so I think
transgenders are probably higher than
well, I think
men,
this
but
correlates. I think this correlates, because if you create, like you said, if you create a promised land without a family, is it really that
it's not a promised land.
it's not a promised land?
It's probably hell.
It's probably
In
hell.
fact, I think they even talked about that um a Well, you know what? I think he actually talks about Chris Williamson has this guy on talking about the 7 million men out that have checked out of the and
job market.
he mentions, he's like, wouldn't life without other people just be hell? Like, isn't that, he's like, I think that's probably my definition of hell would be life without others.
Yeah.
And
well,
that,
and you know, and society has kind of turned their back on men in a larger sense. And like the acronym that you just explained, the men going their own way, this is like a response, I think, to society going, you know, to cops and to you know, saying, you know, we don't
need men.
We don't need
we
men.
don't need men.
We don't
And
value. And so they're turning their backs.
Back, we had Nathan Diltz on, and we talked about this phrase that this doctor said on Chris Williamson's show, where he says,
get rid of the Y chromosome.
Get rid of, if in a future where we can have female ovum just connected and to make an offspring, I see it as a good thing that we would eventually remove the Y chromosome from society, from the population. And so you have men that are just like, well, if I'm just going to be hated by everybody and I'm going to be the one that needs to be removed, then I'm just going to check out.
They're doing it to themselves, right? So they're not getting, everybody's kind of like, oh, you're the problem, the patriarchy, all this kind of stuff. And they're doing this to themselves. They're going, okay, in that case, I'm stepping out. I'm leaving. I'm done.
Yeah. And my point to the story is that in the story, they had the opportunity to leave, receive freedom on their own.
Yeah.
But they said, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think the story is calling out to those that would
step away.
I mean, it's a scripture that's considered holy writ, and maybe it's talking to those men that want to just check out.
Yeah.
It's telling you something.
There is no promised land without family.
There is no promised land without family. If you can't take your family with you, if you can't take women with you, well, and in basically the same way, if you can't take women with you, you can't take children with you, because women are the only arbiters to children.
Yeah.
Family.
So that's what I would argue, that's what gives men purpose.
Our women and children.
Yeah, our family.
100%.
Yeah.
Women and children are the beauty that tames the beast. Tale as old as time.
Yeah.
Song as old as rhyme. Beauty and the beast. I've said it before. We have a darkness in us that is brought to bear in being able to be part of a woman and a child's life.
And we're seeing it eroded. So here's a thing. If women don't appreciate men and men leave, and for the falseness that is a promised land without women and children, then they're going to get into despair. They're going to kill themselves. And that's why not only do we have men who aren't working, who aren't fornicating, because that's down too. They did a study recently that said that young people aren't having as much sex as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
And and the battle of the sexes is raging. Women are going, you oppress me, and then men are going, oh no, I didn't oppress you, and I, if you feel that way, I'm taken off. Instead of working together and trying to work out those problems, they're just all doing this, just getting, and
the infighting. Yeah,
the infighting.
Chris Williamson, I think Chris Williamson talks a lot about this, and he's pretty big on talking about this, is that we want to point the finger at, MGTOWs want to point the finger at feminism, and women want to point their finger at, toxic masculinity. And we both want to just keep pointing the finger at each other.
Yeah.
Like, no, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. He's like, no, guys. We gotta figure this out, because we need each other.
Yeah.
Ultimately, like, this is, and I think this is to the point of the story, right? Women save men, and this is how the Exodus story starts. Women save the masculine by saying no to killing the masculine, right? That's kind of the pointed out in the fact that the midwives won't kill. They decide not to kill the
Israelite
the
babies.
boys, the Israelite babies, right? So and then men have the opportunity to leave without the women, and they don't.
They go, no, we're not leaving without. And then it also goes into, and this is to a lesser extent, their flocks. So essentially their ability to live.
I stopped the video and I thought about it a lot, and I'm like, oh yeah, men going, why? Yes, men can't go their own way without, they can't. Men aren't going to go to a promised land. It's not going to be the promised land. In fact, it'll be hell if they go there without the women and the children.
And the suicide rate among men is higher than it's ever been.
And going on that same wavelength, then I realized that the same thing was said. Pharaoh was going to allow them to take their women and children, but not any of their wealth. Not their flocks, not their
ability to live.
Riches. And so I had to go back, and I wrote down, the promised land is nothing without our families and without our wealth.
Yeah.
So,
well, they specifically say for sacrificing to God, but you could argue sacrificing to the greater good. So you bring your wealth along, wealth is probably, because it's been
well, and it could just be sustenance. It could just be food, right? Because I mean, the animals are going to are ultimately the animals, the flocks, the sheep, they're going to provide for they're going to provide food for sustenance. And this may go back to the fact that the Israelites say that we need to go and that we may feast unto the Lord, right?
Okay. So
they must leave it is tyranny
about sustenance.
Feast unto the Lord, right? Yeah. And they talked a lot about eating with people. Like,
it's like the basis of society is
breaking bread with each other.
Breaking bread
probably one of the most important things that we can do for peace, right? Yeah. And they talk about how in Washington, the maybe one of the things that pushes our polarization, Democrats and Republicans can't talk to each other because they're not really something changed where they're not living with each other in Washington. They're actually living in their cohorts, and they fly into Washington, do their stuff, and then leave. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if that goes away, then Republicans and Democrats aren't having soccer practice together. They're not having dance practice together.
Yeah.
They're not talking.
Taking their kids. Yeah.
They're not going out and eating with each other. right? They're not
So there's no
breaking bread with each other, and therefore
the polarization gets wider.
The polarization just happens, right? And that was their point, is that to leave the tyranny, you have to be able to go out and feast to your God.
Yeah.
And this is something that's just inside of us to have, to break bread with each other.
Yeah.
And
like the best conversations usually happen over a dinner table.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many, like, there's probably many families out there who just don't sit down at the dinner table anymore.
Oh, I mean, it's tough. It's tough for us, right? Like, yeah. I find that we'll go a long time without sitting down and having dinner together.
We try to do it once. It's usually two to three times a week.
Yeah, which is good. Like, I mean, you're probably ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve.
Well, I've noticed my children can't wait to finish and get back on their phones.
Oh,
it's like, not like there's deep conversation going on. They're like, oh, yeah, I'm just gonna eat and go get my phone. And I'm like, what? Hold on.
Wait, let's talk. Let's break bread together. Yeah, I think that's, and they say, they kind of talked about it, that we're a society that has lost ritual. And I thought about that, and I thought about, blessing the food, right? Like, we grew up, when we grew up, we never ate without blessing the food, generally.
Well, and I'd go one further on this, because in the LDS Church and Mormonism in general, they have been taught to fold their arms, right?
Yeah.
And bless the food, right? And I find it a closer ritual when you hold hands.
Yeah, yeah.
And you bless the food. Because then it's bringing, there's a circle, there's a closeness to it, there's a and that's what I've been doing with my family for 10 years now. Because it's a small nitpick, but I've always felt a little closer when you held hands to say grace.
Yeah.
And I think that was lost with the whole idea that of folding your arms and bowing your head instead.
Right. Which it's probably much more common in the in like Protestant or
Catholic,
the Protestant Christian, not Protestant. I'm thinking Protestant would be the right word. Those religions that have branched off of Catholicism, right? They probably are much more apt to do holding hands prayer than we were generally raised with. So in Mormonism, it seems like it's more of a folding arms thing, which, to be honest, I think was probably stemmed from getting children to keep their hands to themselves.
Probably.
I think that's what it kind of stemmed from. But but I think the ritual, we need it in our society. I think we really do kind of need a return to some ritual, and this might
goes
be
back,
part of like eating together.
Well, this goes back to what we were talking about before, with the honoring the generations who've come. We've gotten rid of sitting at the table. We've gotten rid of saying grace over your food. We've gotten rid of, like you said, we've gotten rid of these rituals. And if we were to find our way back, maybe the shitstorm that is our country right now would, correct itself, but and just having these conversations maybe is the one step in the right direction. we're about time.
Yeah.
You have any other thoughts?
I thought a little bit about that. They kind of talked a little bit about that the Israelites leaving Egypt was kind of a recreation. So
Apocalypse
the
and new beginning is what you're
the
talking about.
apocalypse and then a new beginning. Yep.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything falls apart in with the plagues.
I think
Everything just
that's
basically
where we
falls
are
to
now.
shit.
I
And
think we're
then it's moving out of that. It's a recreation, right?
yeah.
And Paggio, I think, talks about it, about the fact that they're led by a water and fire, right? So both kind of representing a renewing, kind of a
Yeah.
recreation
Destruction and
of,
then life. Yeah,
yeah.
he brings this up, the apocalypse and the new beginning. It's really interesting because I think we're kind of in that now. And I have this idea, I wanted to run this by you, that the world, we have a lot of apocalyptic symbolism in religion and in pop culture. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we did several months back, we did a whole deep dive into the Book of Eli, and there's Mad Max Fury Road, and there's just a ton of stuff about how the end is nigh, and
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff. And what if, and I've talked about this before, but I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but what if the end of the world doesn't ever come? What if the end of the world is the end of an era that moves
Mm-hmm.
into another era? So if you take the idea of World War II, if you were a
Mm-hmm.
housewife in middle America, nowhere, during World War II, you were listening to the radio, and you would have thought that this was the end of the world
Yeah.
after hearing about what's going on in Nazi Germany. You would have, there were rations, there were food rations at the time.
Yep.
You would have thought that this was the end of the world, and in a sense, it was the end of one era, moved into another era.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where we are now with the uh, uh, virus that we just went through of unspecified origins. Um, in with those
Yeah.
lockdowns. Now, it's not the same. It wasn't as atrocious as the as World War II or as Vietnam or as the wars that we've been through, but it is a change. It is a change from one aspect or one era to another. So it's basically going through a specific apocalypse, into a new
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think an apocalypse can not necessarily just be like the end of everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it everything falls apart. Everything can, fall apart, but generally I think it's a movement from some things falling apart and then something rising up anew
Yeah.
from that, right? I
Yeah.
think, and I think that goes to the story. I think that's
Yeah, for sure.
what happens, because they go through some major growing pains, right? There's people that the Israelites that say, hey, we got to go back. Like, it was
Yeah.
better to be in bondage and have full stomachs than
Than to be starving in the
to be
desert.
starving out here in the desert, right?
Well, and
There's
Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. He's always saying that we might be in the desert right now, our society, as a society,
mm-hmm.
because we're kind of wandering and we don't know
Yeah.
really where we're going, and as a collective, as a
Yeah.
society, and that speaks to me because that's kind of where we're at. We're just kind of, I don't know, wandering in the desert.
Wandering around in the desert. Yeah. And before getting to the promised land, they wandered around in the desert for 40 years. Right.
Well, and then
So
the boom of the 1950s happened right after World War II.
the World War II. Yeah. So, I mean, they might have been an apocalypse and then finding their way to a promised land.
Yeah.
And we may be back to an apocalypse of sort.
Yeah.
And
I think that's that's I'm hoping that's where we're at now.
So
as a society.
It's, and I think it kind of goes to, the promised land could be around the corner, but what are we willing to do to, in a sense,
do we have the wisdom to grab
go back? Yeah. Or do we have the wisdom? Are we willing to turn to an ancient ethic that that will help us get there to that promised land, right? It's kind of interesting to just think about that as a society, we've kind of killed an overarching ethic. We've come out of religions in droves, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it, and we had Nathan on a little while ago, and it's like, is this telling of a need for us to have a resurgence in religion, right? Probably. Yeah, maybe.
But
maybe this is.
I don't know how long these last, right? I mean, it could last into our children's old age. Who knows? Who knows, really? Because,
well, maybe that's up to us.
Yeah.
That might be more up to us than we give ourselves credit. Right?
Yeah.
Like the children of Israel had to make decisions, right? Like, hey, we're not going to leave without our children. We're not going to leave without our sustenance.
Without our wives, yeah.
Right. And we're so let's do this, but let's do it right. And
find our way to the promised land.
And then, let's go out. Let's risk everything and go out into the wilderness and find our way to the promised land. I mean, we might be there where, I think, and generally I think what we do here is maybe, in, not to give ourselves a pat on the back or to any kind of hubris, but like, maybe it's to help men find a way where those men that are in the dark can pull themselves into the light and be able to work with women and with children to go to that promised land, to find that promised land,
to find the greater good.
It's gonna take some growing pains. It's gonna take some tough changes, right? Men may have to give up their porn and give up their sex robots and hit the gym, right? And this has been all over the internet. Hit the gym, fix yourself.
Yeah.
Get a job, clean your room, right? So maybe we're just jumping on that bandwagon a little bit, but
there is truth to it. There's truth.
Yeah, there's 100%. There's truth to this,
because
right?
even people who are in despair, they talk about when they start working out, they start feeling better.
Yeah. Putting their lives together.
Yeah.
Right.
Putting their lives together. So I guess we can end on that.
Sure.
What are our socials?
Yeah, we got to follow us on Twitter at Brothers V Random. We're on Instagram at the Brothers Random, YouTube at the Brothers Random. We're on the Brothers Random on Rumble, and we're on podcasts, Spotify, where you can find all the podcasts.
Yeah, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just look for the Sword in the Skull. That's the indication. Thanks for that discussion, brother. I think we're out with that. I'd like to say to our audience, keep reading, keep listening, keep watching, learn more. We'll see you, brother.
See you, brother.